I'm here to introduce tonight Melissa Conn, the Associate Director of Save Venice Incorporated. We asked Melissa to present the very important activities of one of the several comitati that here in Venice do raise funds and promote their activities in favor of Venetian cultural heritage. We decided as Venice International University to promote a semester dedicated to these topics, and we believe that the cooperation in the exchange with these important institutions in Venice is at the heart of our ongoing debate. Today we have the first lecture. Just to remind for all the people who are participating tonight, in 1 week, next week, we will have the second lecture, which will cover a very different topic, a very interesting one, by the way, by Michael Hart, Occupy Wall Street, the reason of the movement, just for you to be informed. Melissa Conn has a set of PowerPoint slides that will allow us to learn more about Save Venice and its activities, about her role in this initiative, and the activities, overall activities that this important institution is carrying on in strict cooperation with other comitati in Venice. We've been working with some of them. We've been able to cooperate as Venice International University with Venice in Peril in the past. We've been working on a movie about this topic for the Veneto region with Lady Clark. I am personally very curious about what Melissa Conn will tell us, not only from a scientific point of view, but also as a citizen of Venice, to learn more about what they are currently doing for Venetian cultural heritage. We asked Melissa Conn to speak, to present for about 40 minutes, and then we will have Professor Gianighian, who will discuss what will be presented. Professor Gianighian is the person from UAV who is currently promoting the semester, especially from architectural point of view, from the point of view of UAV, and we're very glad to have him here to complete the picture that Melissa will provide us with. Thank you very much for being here. I will be sitting over there, so I will have a chance to see the slides myself. The floor is yours.
So Save Venice is an American nonprofit organization, and we were founded after the 1966 floods, which brought the world's attention to the problems that Venice faces. UNESCO made an appeal worldwide to anyone who was influenced by Venice, by artists, architects, writers, to get together to try to raise funds for Venice. And so at that point, many international committees were formed. And at that time, Venice in Peril was formed, and also Save Venice. And here we have a picture of the founders of Venice in Peril, with Lady Clark that was mentioned before, and also the founders of Save Venice. And so these committees, through the years, have grown. And now there are 22 international committees that work for the safeguarding of Venice. Through the years, Save Venice has also grown. And here I'm showing, in the beginning, of course, in the 60s, then we have the 1980s, and then in 2008, the way our board of directors changes. We're formed by a board of directors. We have right now about 25 people with a chairman and a president. And from this board of directors, we select the projects. We have a projects committee, our Comitato Scientifico, and these are different art historians and historians who help to select the restoration projects. We go around and visit projects. We're invited by the museums, the churches, local authorities, the superintendencies who propose different restoration projects. And sort of depending on our budget and our interest and what we think we can raise funds for, we adopt projects. All the money we have is raised. We're not a foundation. We don't have an endowment. We have money that we raise from an annual appeal, from fundraising events, from lectures, from concerts, cruises, anything we can do to raise funds for Venice. And all this money is tax deductible in the United States. So people can donate to Save Venice and receive a tax deduction. And the money is brought to Venice, and my job in the Venice office of Save Venice is to spend the money. And this is done in collaboration with the Italian Ministry of Culture and the Superintendencies of Fine Arts and Monuments of Venice. Save Venice has restored thousands of works of art since we began in the late 60s. And we have 75 locations all around Venice. But projects aren't the only thing we do. We have interns. These are our interns this year from Colgate University in our office. We've had internships in the past for restorers. We've had 2 American restorers who have come to Venice and learned restoration techniques here and then gone back to work for museums in the United States. We have publications. This is a book that just came out this past year, celebrating 4 decades of restoration in Venice. It's a catalog of all of our restoration projects. We were also the subject of another book written by curators from the Accademia Galleries on 11 restoration projects financed by Save Venice in the Accademia. We've also had exhibitions. Here they're setting up the exhibition that is now on at the Accademia on the ceiling of the Sala dell'Albergo that Save Venice restored. Another very important exhibition was on the Esther canvases from the Church of San Sebastiano. This was at Palazzo Grimani this past spring. Another exhibition of our restoration projects was held in the Church of San Sebastiano last spring and over the summer. Which brings me back to all the people who are involved in these type of projects. So when I was explaining the collaboration that we have for a restoration project, that's what makes it interesting. This was the inauguration of our exhibition at San Sebastiano last spring, but it shows you the different people who are involved. You have a representative from Save Venice. This is David Rosand, illustrious art historian who is the head of our projects committee. You have the superintendent of monuments, Renata Codello, and 2 of her people. We have engineer Lianello and Amelita Basso. And this is Gian Matteo Caputo representing the Catholic Diocese. So it's a real combination of people and factors that allow us to restore the artworks. It's financing from Save Venice, but we're very much involved in every step of the way with the owners of the work of art and also the public officials who administrate them. We work very closely with restorers. We have 2 restorers here, along with another project director from the Ministry of Culture in the Church of San Sebastiano. The restorers make all of this possible. Venice is very fortunate to have a very large collection of very talented people who restore works on wood, work on canvas, stone, and a variety of forms. And so based on lists of restorers who are accepted by the Ministry of Culture, Save Venice hires these particular restorers depending on the job that they need to do. To give you a little overview of Save Venice through the years, one of our first projects from 1969 was the Madonna Nicopea in the Basilica San Marco. We also were very much involved on the Church of San Donato in Murano from 1971 to 78, when the entire floor was actually picked up, the mosaic floor, and a subfloor was put into the church, and then the mosaic pieces were put back down. Another major project for Save Venice was the Church of Santa Maria dei Miracoli, which we restored from 19 1989 to 1998. This was the first big project for Save Venice. Here you can see after restoration. It was the largest project that Save Venice had ever confronted, and it was also highly experimental with the Ministry of Culture, the Superintendency of Monuments, and architect Mario Piana, of the Superintendency of Monuments, who came up with a new way to desalinize the marble. So it was a very important project for everyone involved. We also recently restored the facade of the city hospital, the Scuola Grande di San Marco. We've worked in the ghetto. This is the Scuola Tedesca. We did structural work there, improving the structural stability of the building. We were involved with several other committees, sort of spearheading a group to restore the Jewish cemetery on the Lido, where the land was actually reclaimed and tombstones were recovered and restored. We've restored major paintings like the Dandolo Lunette in the Frari, to a kind of little-known painting in the Accademia, this fabulous deposition by Tintoretto that used to be in storage at the Accademia, and with funding through Save Venice, a suggestion from one of Save Venice's board members, the painting, we found funds to restore it, and it actually went to Boston, where it was one of the prime paintings in an exhibition of rivals in Venice, Renaissance Venice. Sometimes our involvement may be to help spearhead a project. This is the ceiling of the Sala dell'Albergo in the Scuola Grande di San Rocco. And Save Venice was asked by the Ministry of Culture, the Superintendency of Monuments, to contribute some initial funding for testing to determine how to restore the ceiling. We paid to have one of the ceiling canvases taken down, and we worked on about 10 square meters of gilded ceiling. And with those results, then the Ministry of Culture was able to, the local officials were able to ask the Ministry of Culture for money to restore the entire ceiling. And so our small contribution led to a much larger state contribution. So that was another important example of collaboration between public and private. We look after our works of art. When we adopt them, we have a feeling of, maybe ownership isn't the right word, but it's something you want to continue to take care of. This is a painting from the Church of San Salvador, the Supper at Emmaus, disputed between Bellini and Carpaccio. And just last spring, we were aware of mold on the painting. So although it was restored about 10 years ago, we took it down again, and a restorer was able to remove the mold from the surface of the painting and reinstall it. So that's an important part of what Save Venice does, is to keep an eye, sort of to be a watchdog and help collaborate for the restoration of art and architecture in Venice. A project that we're about to begin next spring will be the iconic Assunta, the Assumption of the Virgin in the Frari. And this will be an interesting project because we want to have a type of scaffolding, a mobile scaffolding, so it won't block the painting from view. The painting will remain on site, and it will be a very transparent testing and restoration. The painting is very, very dusty now. One of the first steps will be to dust it, and as it's a panel painting, the wooden panels are out of line. And so through testing and examining it, we'll be able to determine with the Ministry of Culture and the Superintendency of Fine Arts what type of intervention this painting needs to undergo. The main reason I'm here this evening is to present the Church of San Sebastiano, which has been Save Venice's major project for the past 4 years. San Sebastiano is in Dorso Duro. It's a corner of Venice that's not often seen by tourists, but it's a church that is often visited because of the decorative cycle by Paolo Veronese. The church is dedicated to Saint Sebastian. Here you have him on the facade of the church. Saint Sebastian, of course, is very important in Venice because he's a plague saint. He's a saint that you pray to for relief of the plague. This church actually was originally dedicated to St. Mary of the Assumption, and because a particularly bad plague hit in that area in the 1400s, it was decided to enlarge the church and change the dedication. So the Church of San Sebastiano was built between 1506 and 1548 by the architect Scarpinino, and then the great Paolo Veronese is hired to decorate the interior. So Paolo at that point is 27 years old. He's already established a career in Venice, but he's a newcomer. And he and his younger brother, 10 years younger, so his 17-year-old kid brother, and another friend who's probably Antonio Fazola, are hired to first paint the sacristy of the church and then work on the ceiling. Then they continue with the frescoes. And over a 20-year period, then Paolo contributes to various aspects to the church. But the main work that Paolo Veronese and his brother do is basically between 1556 and 1559. So he's not spending his entire life decorating the church. He contributes to the church later on in his life. But the main part is from that period. And it's quite amazing to have a church in Venice that's still intact, that didn't undergo a lot of changes. There are not a lot of Baroque interventions or anything else. It's basically how Paolo Veronese envisioned the interior of the church at that time. Save Venice first got involved in San Sebastiano because problems were pointed out to us by the project director Amalia Basso from the Superintendency of Monuments. Here you see the whole ceiling before restoration, but what we were concerned about are these white spots, and these were visible from the ground. But at that point, nobody had any idea if it was caused from water infiltration. Was it a mold in the church? Now, what was it? And so Save Venice agreed in 2007 to finance testing. It was close to $100,000 worth of testing of various aspects to understand the actual condition of the church. And at that point, we were also aware that the ceiling, something was wrong besides the physical condition and the problems of damage, that the color tone was off. You see that Paolo Veronese, he's frescoed, wall paintings directly on the wall, these columns to imitate Istrian stone. And his idea is that the ceiling cornices and everything else should imitate that stone as well. That all this area should look like the frescoed wall. Instead, it looks like wood. It is wood, but the idea of Paolo Veronese was for his wood to imitate stone. His fresco is imitating stone. It's a whole play on stone imitating, and everything is imitating another medium. And so, in addition to the physical problems, it's also an aesthetic problem or interpretation that Paolo's original idea for the church is no longer visible. That those cornices, all the woodwork, should be white because it was supposed to imitate stone. Part of our testing involves taking pigment samples. This is a pigment sample, and you need to identify what the paint is. You can identify 19th century intervention through synthetic pigments that would have been used at that time. You can identify, that's how you know what's repainting, what's original. You can also identify things that have altered, which becomes a big problem that I'll discuss with San Sebastiano, is that the paint, the colors aren't what they are today because of problems with the pigments. An important part before we started was to work in the attic of San Sebastiano, the sottotetto, because here what you see, this project put together by the Superintendency of Monuments and Engineer Leonello, was to verify the structural stability of the attic and the beams. These are the beams that hold up the roof of the church. And all you see here is what's holding up that incredible wooden ceiling. This whole structure was sort of reworked in the 1860s, and what needed to be done now was to make sure that this could still hold up the weight of the ceiling. And luckily, after all the testing and verifications, it was found that the structure is basically sound. We had to replace one beam head and reinforce, put some of these metal zinc belts on some of the beams. The roof was sound. There wasn't a problem with leaking. We had determined that those white spots that I showed you on the painting were actually a problem in the varnish from the 19th century, something that could be repaired. And so we're sort of on our way to a successful restoration. We know that the ceiling is not going to fall. We also, though, before we could begin, had to disinfest the ceiling, because this is all pigeon droppings, it's guano. This is the back side of one of Veronese's ceiling canvases. There's obviously a wooden support behind it, but we couldn't send art handlers into the attic even to remove these canvases because it was unhealthy. The pigeons were long gone, but what remained was the guano, which is very acidic. So we also had to clean that out of the ceiling. We set up a big scaffolding, which allowed visibility. You could still visit the church. It's not blocking in any way, because it's very important to allow visitors in and also to allow Mass to still take place. So it's an important balance of restoring something, but not being so invasive that the building has to shut, or that the function of the building, which in this case is a church, would have to be put in jeopardy. So the ceiling canvases are taken down and they're rolled and put on a boat and taken across town to the Misericordia Restoration Laboratory. Paolo Veronese would have painted them originally off-site. They would have been rolled and brought to the church, and so we're doing the reverse, taking them away for restoration. The rest of the ceiling needs to be restored on-site. So we have a team of restorers who start the very painstaking job of consolidating all the gilding, working on the panels. And as we work, we made more and more discoveries of understanding the ceiling. The ceiling had been very, very famous for the 3 canvases, but the wooden elements of the ceiling were becoming equally as important. Here you can see all the paint chips, these problems you're facing. Here you see a before and an after, where we're removing a lot of this sort of repainting to make it look like wood, and integrating it again into a lighter color so it matches the fresco, so it looks like marble. There you see one of the cornices restored, and now once again you have this alignment between the fresco column and the cornice above it, and back to Paolo Veronese's vision for the entire church. The various details, you have all this wonderful gilding, most of it 16th century with some 19th century additions. Other important aspects that came out, this is a before restoration, are these figures of winged victory that are very sort of hard to distinguish. We have a before and after, and in this sense Paolo Veronese is creating winged victory figures in the spandrels of the arches he's created around the oval canvases. And he's imitating bronze. That's why the color as it is. Here it's hard to understand what it is, and here it becomes evident. He's imitating a bronze sculpture. This is a motif that Paolo Veronese continues to use for the rest of his life. In most of his paintings with architecture, you will see these winged victory figures. They all have different attributes. You can see where they are. We're talking about these areas. There are 8 of them. And they're very interesting because they're painted directly on the boards of the ceiling. They're not an individual panel that was installed. On the flip side of that is that dirty attic you saw with the pigeon guano. So Paolo would have had to paint them on site. And they have very unusual cut marks all through them. Here, these are the beams, the boards. And after restoration, you have to leave this space because it's wood. The wood expands and contracts. And so you have to allow for the movement. And so you have to leave the space. But what we were able to identify is sort of the working technique of Paolo Veronese. He made cartoons, we think, and then put them up on the ceiling and then cut them out. And these cut marks, I think you can see, he also uses them a bit to define and to draw. And that is what's sort of rarely seen. Most of the restorers and historians that came to look had never seen this. This is a technique you use on a fresco. You'll cut into a fresco to make your drawing. And here Paolo has adapted his great experience he already had on frescoes onto when he has to paint directly on the flip side of the wooden beams. And so these cuttings, these markings from the tracings also function of giving a bit of depth and outline to his figure that then he fills in freehand. So it was a very interesting discovery. Here you can see just how marvelous these figures are up on the ceiling. Other important aspects of the ceiling are the 4 virtues in the 4 corners of the church. These are roundels. They're on wood. Then they could be taken out, and they were painted off-site somewhere originally and put in the ceiling. And as you see before, they were covered by a varnish, which made us not understand what color they were supposed to be. And here, once again, Paolo Veronese he's imitating. He's using the canvas, the wooden background to imitate stone. This is supposed to look like a stone statue in the corner. It's the white idea. This is the figure of hope. And there you see her after restoration. So basically, just taking off all the discolored varnish, you get down to the original. We haven't repainted, we've removed the varnish of what the figure is supposed to look like. We have faith. This is charity, very beautiful figure of charity. And then, of course, another virtue very important to the Venetian Republic is justice. Interesting that the church has chosen these 4 virtues as well as to be part of the ceiling. So these are the figures that are right here, 1, 2, 3, 4. It was quite a big debate when they were, after restoration, put back up as to what angle they were supposed to have. We had photographs of what they were. This is how it was before restoration. But some of them have their heads facing this way, some of them have their head right here facing diagonally. In the 19th century, they were restored. They could have been put up incorrectly then. The only thing that could be done this time was to follow how they were in place before, with their positions as far as the way the heads and positioning of the bodies of the figures may have been different. So it's kind of a lot of guesswork. The other big surprise factor from this ceiling were the panels. We have 10 panel paintings. These are wooden panels with balustrades and garlands and putti. These had always been, for years, considered workshop of Paolo, not anything to do with Paolo, just not considered because they were in such bad condition. We were able to remove them from the ceiling, and we set them up in the barco, which is the monk's loft of that church. So we didn't have to remove them from the church. We're upstairs in the loft, what could be called a choir loft, and we're ready to start restoration. And you can see how yellow they are. This is a big problem with San Sebastiano. Before restoration, everything is very yellow. And so starting the work, we also had to work on the backside and to make sure that the panels weren't warping, that these supports that have been added probably in the 19th century weren't creating a problem. And we have a restorer here working on a new system of anchorage so that the panels can move, but that they're stable. You see here the individual pieces and this funny yellow color everywhere. And this yellow color has to do with this pigment. It's blue smalt. And through all the testing we did, we found that Paolo Veronese used blue smalt on his frescoes, on his wooden paintings, and on his canvases. Frescoes, it's not a problem because mixed with water, smalt does not deteriorate. When it's mixed on an oil painting, you end up with an alteration. Within about 100 years, it starts to fade, and it creates a chemical reaction with the oil that's used as a binder, and you get a yellow color. And this yellow became evident everywhere. And so the problem was the decision, do you remove that or not? These were particularly complicated because underneath the blue smalt, they had a layer of indigo paint, another blue. And so the Ministry of Culture, the Superintendent of Monuments, in this situation with the panels, decided not to remove the yellow, because it was part of something Paolo Veronese had painted. Although he'd not intended it to be a yellow background, it would have been a blue sky, it was left. A different decision was made with the canvases. This instead was a repainting from probably the 1860s, and there's nothing we could do about it. This shows how very dark the rest of it would have been, because somebody repainted this section to match this. And that we also had to leave because there was underneath it, there was nothing. So when you're dealing with artworks that are 500 years old, you have to take into consideration the age. Here we have these beautiful putti figures. You can see before restoration and then after. And here you can see a bit of the blue coming through from the indigo layer underneath. So we were able to recover a little bit. This is the exhibition we had in the church where we brought down 2 of the panels and the 4 virtues so that people could see them up close, because normally they were way up on the ceiling, and so this was a rare opportunity from April through June of last year that people could actually see the ceiling panels, and we had information about the restoration. And so it was a good way of promoting and explaining what was being done. Then the panels, of course, went back up into their position on the wall, up on the ceiling there. You can see up through the beams in the attic. And while this is happening, we're also working on the canvases. These are across town at the Misericordia Lab. Here you see one of the canvases before and during. Go through, and you're starting to notice with the color. Well, before work starts, the restorers have to analyze what the situation is. What's repainting, which was determined that the entire blue is repainted. Which parts were retouching, various aspects of damage of the painting. They also went through x-rays, so you could see the underdrawing of Paolo Veronese, and how he created the work. And again, we find the blue smalt. This becomes evident through cleaning. We start taking off sections. Here you can see this is just removing varnish. You can see how yellow it is that. Here, all they've done is taken this off. They're just removing and cleaning. Here you can see the difference in the color, and then it turns out that this looks like brown is actually a yellow garment. And we started, again, this is the Esther canvas, the central canvas of the Coronation of Esther, and we're starting to work on the sky because this is the overpainted blue sky, and once they started to clean that, they found this underneath, and this is the altered blue smalt. And then working to remove the oils in that, the restorers were able to come down to this layer, which is a very faded sort of Venice in the winter sky. And so the decision was made at this point. They didn't want to keep this 19th century repainting, and obviously this orange is quite horrible. And so going down to the next layer, the base, they were able to recover a bit of Veronese's blue, but most importantly, they recovered the original cloud composition that Veronese had. So we've lost the color, but we still have the drawing and the design. And this was a decision made by the Ministry of Culture, but the different division, it was the Superintendency of Fine Arts, who decided that it was best to remove the smalt alteration, that Paolo Veronese didn't really want an orange sky. And here you can see the various steps to reach this decision, the various cleaning to get back to as much of the original as there is. Here's the painting after restoration, and we're very happy with this decision. It sort of, it would have been lovely with a blue sky, but taking away that overpainting has given more depth to the painting, and you can see all the different colors that Veronese uses, and it's not a distraction having the sky. This is another Vashti, the first canvas, and this is the Mordecai canvas, all after restoration. What's incredible about these paintings is to see them close up, which was the opportunity was given at Palazzo Grimani in an exhibition last summer, but also through the photographs that we have. When you're able to see the details, zooming in on these paintings that are seen from 30 meters away up on the ceiling. But up close you can see how Veronese works with a dab of white to create the pearls, another a dab here to create light. Zooming in this close, the jewelry on Esther, you can see all the little brush strokes, and how Veronese relies on the herringbone weave of the canvas to give texture to his paintings. So these are all details up close. You also notice these little specks. This is from flies. This is deposits from flies that then end up eating into the canvas, and it's very difficult to remove. So the series of damage. This is damage on the painting where all the original paint is missing, and it was decided not to recreate that section. And so you see the bare canvas. We didn't want to falsify what Veronese hadn't painted, and so it's left. Here, this incredible armor, which are just dabs of yellow and white. Wonderful details that Paolo Veronese creates. That's an eye. And so it was a wonderful way to discover how Paolo worked through the details of these canvases. As we said, the exhibition in Palazzo Grimani was a wonderful opportunity to show the public. These paintings were brought into the State Museum and shown for 4 months. And it was a very well-received exhibition for the public. And then after the exhibition, the paintings are rolled and they're taken back to the church. And here they are on their way back, the end of July. They're brought back into the church. They're unrolled and prepared to go up. These are the nuns of the Order of San Giuseppe next door to San Sebastiano, who all came to greet Esther, to come see Esther when she came back home to the church. And then she's pulled up on the scaffolding. There's by a pulley and a man. Everyone's holding their breath as we lift Esther back up, and she's installed in the ceiling. This is Angelo. He's up in the attic waiting for the paintings, because when they come back up, they have to be hooked into their position. And this was the end of July. It was terribly hot. And so the people up in the attic waiting for the paintings so they could hook them back into place didn't have the best job. This is the Vashti painting. It gives you the sense of the scale when you have these two people as compared to the figure. And then this is the painting of Mordecai. Mordecai is being prepared. He's going to be put on the stretcher here, and then put back in the ceiling. And here he's being put on the stretcher. We put the Mordecai painting back up in the ceiling, and it wasn't quite right. And so Mordecai went back down, and they had to adjust the stretcher. It wasn't fitting into its position, because this stretcher was partially remade, and there was a bit of an error on the part of the restorer. And so when he had to go back into the ceiling, it didn't fit. These slides don't really give the ceiling justice, but after restoration, the Church of San Sebastiano once again is splendid with Paolo Veronese's works. Here you can see the Esther canvas in place now, with the putti and all the figures around it. This is the Mordecai painting and the Banishment of Vashti. And once again, the whole church. Work continues in San Sebastiano now with this area. Save Venice is funding the restoration of frescoes. Scaffolding is up, and we'll be working on the frescoes of the Annunciation. This is the Angel Gabriel. This is Mary. These were some tests that we were able to do when the scaffolding was up for the ceiling using agar. It's a substance made from algae that was used to clean the ceiling, and they did some tests to see how it worked on the frescoes. It wasn't very effective. These are other elements that will be restored in this first section of frescoes. Of course, testing went on. We took more pigment samples. These are some of the problems we'll be dealing with the frescoes later on in another part of the church. This is an old damage from a long time ago, where the church sort of shifted and this fresco split. And there's actually a difference in levels, about 3 centimeters difference from here to there. And the decisions will have to be made how you deal with this fill. In the 60s during a restoration, it was just covered like that. You have this kind of damage as well in the frescoes. We need to make sure they're not pulling out of the wall, that they're safe. This is a selection of various frescoes that are around the church, which will be treated eventually in various phases. This is the famous San Sebastian before Diocletian, the death of San Sebastiano. He doesn't die from being shot from arrows. He's eventually clubbed to death. This is a marvelous fresco up in the monk's loft, which shows a little intimate view of the monks of San Sebastiano here. Here we have San Sebastian before Diocletian, and here you have a little scene of one of the monks going down a staircase. A little clever addition by Paolo Veronese. Sort of another famous fresco from the church is this scene of the archers shooting their arrows across the church into St. Sebastian on the other side. This is up on the second level of the church. It's hard to see. You can see it from the ground, but it's better seen from the upper monk's loft. And it's a very theatrical interpretation of even the physical space across the church of St. Sebastian being shot. This fresco is in pretty good condition. This one you can see already how bad it is, and we hope to recover a bit more clarity from it. This is the symbol of the Church of San Sebastiano. It's the S with the arrow. It looks like a dollar sign. And our board of directors always laughs about the dollar signs all over the church. But it's an interesting interpretation that the Church of San Sebastiano has with the S through the arrows. We find that in the windows. It's also downstairs carved actually on the walls, the S with the arrow, with a particular symbol, particular to the Church of San Sebastiano in Venice. It's not seen elsewhere. So we always keep that in mind when we see this fresco. And I like to consider this angel as the personification of Save Venice. He's coming in from a faraway place. He might not exactly know what he's doing. In this situation, it looks like he's tripping over the scaffolding, but he's on a mission. He's going to save San Sebastiano. So with that, I end my presentation, and if we're ready.
Let me thank you on behalf of everybody here for this trip, for this marvelous trip, through your activities and especially through this effort that the San Sebastiano Church had. I was impressed. I would ask Giorgio Gianighian to make some comments about this, these slides we just saw. Giorgio, would you join us?
Sorry for my rotten English. It won't last long, so be patient, please. Well, I'm quite happy to be here with you. Your presentation, I think, is brilliant, and it shows the, well, something like 40 years' work to help Venice. So the United Nations appeal was heard, and you appeared in the scene of Venice to help after the flooding of 1966. We saw important people with you. We saw Lady Clark, her husband, Sir Ashley, Valcanover, and through the presentation we met other people, younger, as Satuman, a wood, probably one of the best wood restorers. I met him in China 3 years ago working on a Italian Foreign Ministry project for the preparation of the Chinese people involved in conservation. And then other people. But what I wanted to say is 2 points. The first point is the last project, the San Sebastiano project, which is a very impressive one, because it puts together the three arts of the Venetian monument. Maybe the music is not yet involved, but maybe it will come later. The first one is architecture. So we have Antonio Abbondi, Lo Scarpagnino, who is the architect of the church. Controversial project. It was considered not the best of his work. But anyhow, he's there, and he's working in some way with not physically, of course, but with Paolo Veronese. And so we have architecture and painting. We saw the fresco on the walls in which the columns, that funny columns, they create architecture. So illusion is architecture. And the sculpture. The ceiling is a masterpiece of sculpture, and then the altars and everything. It's really a fusion of the three disciplines in which is composed the Venetian art in San Sebastiano. Three disciplines, three kinds of experts in the restoration. You need people expert in painting restoration. So you have the superintendency of fine arts. Under the direction, the project was done by the Dr. Giulio Manieri Elia. Then you have the sculpture of the ceiling, and so you have the project of the Basso, Dottoressa Basso. And But it's very stupid to restore an important piece of art without restoring the container of it. So there's a third discipline who comes back, which is architecture. Superintendency of monuments, let's simplify the formula, and Alberto Lionello, who is an engineer of conservation of the superintendency. We saw Codello, we saw him, and we saw Dr. Basso together in one of your slides. So this is good, you know, it's not just the paintings. It's the sculptures, the paintings, and the architecture together. In its physicality, in its complexity, not just art, but also wooden trusses, interesting wooden trusses by the Scarpagnino. Similar but more elaborate, the one he designed and built in Castelforte San Rocco. Same years, 1548. So he was enjoying in designing, I'm sure, trusses to support roof of the Venetian houses and churches. And this is good. I appreciate also very much, Melissa, that you didn't say anything about the funding in 40 years. She's very elegant. She's a really Venetian lady. And so no money. But I think they invested quite a large amount of money, and this should be remembered, especially now, in these, not years, but in these days, in which the money for the restoration of the monuments, of the arts, of everything, no money at all. So we need your help, and well, let's occupy again with Mike Hart and Wall Street, and let's get some money for the restoration of Venice. The second point I wanted to talk about is the theoretical problems. We saw that, a couple of examples in which you have lacuna, you don't know what to do, or you have a painting which, because of physical and chemical alterations, became faded, and it has been repainted. If I understood correctly, in the 20th century, they repainted in blue and white the sky of some of the art by Paolo. And well, the decisions are not easy to be taken. Where to stop, what to accept. How do you consider the layering of time and the physical and chemical layering, the action of the weathering, the aging of the physical and chemical elements as the paintings? So it was quite interesting to see the change of the sky from the Venetian hot summer sky into the cold, gray and white winter Venetian sky. And this is good because it's the sign of the time passing and changing things. We are changed by time, and also the art pieces are changed and faded in some way. So the problem is to accept this dynamic action and to establish that it should become as well one part of the restoration, one part of the art. The art is not immovable forever, it's something that changes in time. And also the theory which backs the hands of the restorers follows the same rules. Say 50 years or 80 years ago, probably we would have repainted the blue of the sky. No, now we prefer just to clean it and accept what the cleaning presents. But I'm sure there were many discussions and fights. I wonder what James Beck will say about this restoration. And it's always very controversial. Mr. Beck, Professor Beck, he fought against the restoration of the Sistina Chapel in Rome, and he said it's terrible. It's a spick and span restoration. the ceiling has been washed with this cleaner, and very interesting debate. This is just to show you that the theory is controversial, so that the action is also controversial. And this is life of monuments, life of paintings, life of art. And I think that more or less I ended, but I am really impressed by the amount of work and the money and the efforts and the practice. Now, the third point is, and then I will end, sorry, maybe I'm too long, is that I met, sorry if I talk about myself, but I must tell you that I met Save Venice maybe 20 years ago. I was invited as an independent referee to evaluate the quality of the restoration of one of their contributions, which was the Church of Santa Maria dei Miracoli. I did it for you, and I enjoyed the way of dealing things. Okay, you choose a project, you do it, you provide the money, but then you need an independent referee to evaluate it and to say it was worthwhile or not to have spent so much money in it. And this is a good way to do things, because I could have said it's a very bad restoration, and probably the final part, the final chunk of money or financing will be interrupted by it. So this is good. Art is like human beings, it's controversial, it needs a lot of discussion, and at the end we obtain, in this case, as in many others, I think very interesting result. Thank you very much.
Before I'm sure you have questions, you have observations, but before opening the discussion, I will ask Melissa to complete her presentation. I'm an economist. I'm not an art historian, so I think we do need some additional information just to figure out how this very complex institutional model works. I think we have learned a lot about the scientific methodology. We learn how Save Venice, is able to promote this kind of restorations, and I'm very impressed, as Giorgio, by the quality and the commitment, scientific commitment of this process, is involved. But at the same time, I think it is important for us to understand a couple of to go through a couple of points that immediately pop up when we listen to your presentation. The first is funding. This seems to be a very complex process which requires very important economic resources. In '66, it was clear that after the flooding, it was clear that Venice needed some support, some external support. In 2011, things have changed. We have 23 million tourists every year. Venice has become one of the most important touristic sites in the world. There are plenty of ways, to raise, to identify resources. Has your job changed, over time, in these 50 years, in these 40 years, actually, 50 if we can't, but in these 40 years of activities, how do you collect these resources? How you justify your activities? How you choose, the sites you want to work on? And the second point I would like you to let us know about is, do you see a way to generalize this kind of effort? Obviously, this church is a fantastic work of art, and we're all fascinated by Paolo Veronese talent. But at the same time, I ask myself whether this is a model that we can generalize and multiply all over Venice, and do these committee do this, over time, or should we find another model? This is, in your opinion, to cover all the needs of the city, especially right now, where the pressure of tourism and of all these people entering churches, visiting museum, is becoming more and more important.
Okay, I'm not quite sure where to begin. As far as the funding, how Save Venice raises money through donations. We have a new membership, but this has only been in the past year. Normally, we just send an annual appeal. We have a chapter in Boston that adopts projects. We have a chapter in California. We have foundations that will adopt specific projects. With the Church of San Sebastiano, we sort of split it up where you could adopt certain elements of the ceiling. We normally had not wanted to get into that situation, sort of selling a work of art. It's not selling, ownership, but someone would adopt a specific portion. So our Boston chapter adopted the painting with the horses of Mordecai. The California chapter adopted the Vashti canvas. A group of friends donated money in honor of an art historian, Mary Frank, and they funded the coronation of Esther. And even the smaller elements all had individual sponsors. We put together a catalog, basically a wish list, and you could go through and for $15,000.
Put the finger, say,
hopefully, for $15,000 you could restore a piece of wood. For $70,000 you could restore the painting. We don't put plaques up. We have signage up during the restoration with the donors' names, but nobody's going to get a permanent sign attached. Possibly at the end of restoration there may be something, a list, but you have to realize these people are getting recognition from our newsletter, from our website, from our publications. But we found, it was sort of an experiment in this San Sebastiano experience, that people like to be associated with a specific aspect. When we restored the facade of the city hospital, Scuola in San Marco, we had a hard time fundraising, getting individual donations. We used that with most of our general funds. General funds are what we raise from our events and trips and general donations. And we couldn't get a lot of specific donors involved for some reason. Whereas at San Sebastiano, maybe because it's more pictorial, people had more sense of identification with the different artworks. We were able to approach it in a different way. With the Miracoli restoration you mentioned, we had the Getty grant, the Getty Foundation involved that gave money along the way.
But just for us to know, is it people in the United States do feel that Venice must be saved still?
There are a group of people who love Venice, who have been inspired by Venice, and who feel like they should give back to Venice, that Venice is part of the world's artistic patrimony. And that certainly an important Italian city, first of all. It's Venice, the Venetian Republic, was also a great inspiration to the United States when it was founded. There are letters in the archives here of Thomas Jefferson writing to the Venetian Republic and wanting recommendations and suggestions on how to set up the United States as a new nation. There's a strange affinity, I think, between New York City and Venice. Somehow the New Yorkers all seem to feel at home in Venice. And so Venice has a strange pull. There's no doubt about it. And so we're able to tap into these people. I mean, some of them are Venice lovers. Other organizations or foundations that give for the arts or give for specific causes, arts-oriented. So it's a variety. We have to have a variety of ways of raising funds. We have to have events. We have to have a big ball in New York City because people will pay to come to that, and we raise a lot of money that then can be brought to Venice. Because my job is to spend the money that my colleagues raise, I guess I'm not as tuned into it. I have the fun part. I know how much everything costs, but the fundraising is difficult because it's a tax deduction in the United States where people can donate to Save Venice and deduct it from their final taxes, quite a considerable amount, and so we're able to do well because of that. We also get money from wills. That's some major donations have come total surprise. We received for the Miracoli restoration $250,000 in 1991 from a school teacher in Brooklyn who had gone to Venice in the 1950s, never returned. But when she died, she left it in her will. She wanted half of her money to go to an animal cause and another half to go to Venice. And we were lucky, the executors of her will found Save Venice and decided that we fit her description. And recently we had another person that we didn't know that left money in their will. So there's no real rhyme or reason to it, but Venice has something that no other city has, and people feel it.
And do you think, just to complete the picture, do you think this is a model that can be generalized?
Okay. I think it's very important, the collaboration between public and private. We've been very successful in that, although it's been unusual. Part of it's through the UNESCO program, but we also, San Sebastiano was independent of UNESCO. It was direct collaboration with the superintendencies in Venice. And so private in the way, it's difficult, a private sponsor that wants something in return. We're not Gucci, we're not selling shoes. We need Save Venice name to be evident because we need attention to gather more money, but we're not selling something. And that's a difficult point that I don't have a solution for. But if some way, if in Venice there can be more possibilities of people getting involved, collaborating with the local authorities, adopting monuments, I think the Venetians themselves would become more active. I mean, we know the Venetians have the very difficult task of maintaining their own buildings, their own apartments, their own situations. But you need to be able to collaborate and allow these types of sponsorship, because the Italian laws are a little different. These EVA exemptions are important. UNESCO is important because they have a tax-exempt status. You don't have to pay the 10 to 20% value-added tax. Save Venice chose to do this restoration and pay all the taxes. We restored the monument and paid 10% to the Italian state as well. But that's, we were also receiving a service from the Ministry of Culture, so it does seem only fitting that we also in some way pay for this service by paying tax on the restoration. Possibly if the Italian government could pass more of a tax-exempt status on conservation. Most other countries have that. In the United States, even Save Venice, if we go and buy pencils at the neighborhood store, we don't pay tax. We don't, and that's something with nonprofit that in Italy is unusual, that there isn't the VAT exemption when you're restoring state property or artistic patrimony or church property. And that would help, I think, to give more incentives to people to get involved.
Any question, any curiosity?
Considering medium-range changes that might come about through the big current economic developments, including the rise of other countries, the relative slide of the United States in comparison, and the dramatic changes that are to be expected, not only at the economic, but at the political and outright geopolitical level in Europe over the next decades. So that on a long-range perspective, one might need different constituencies, extending it to East Asia, for example, or to other countries with interest in Europe and a possible fascination through Venice to develop a similar potential in a long-term future that might be also characterized by the generational breaking away of the typical American donors. It would be interesting to know what their age profile is and how things might happen in the generation of their children and their children's children. So this is a very far-ranging perspective that might also lead us to think about who will have ownership in Venice in a few decades. Mm-hmm. Because this economic development in Italy in particular, but also in Europe in general, could well lead to financially and economically based encroaches into sovereignty situations within established nations. And Venice is a prime example for something that could become an enclave, no longer in the ordinary sense part of the Republic of Italy, just as a possible scenario.
Well, it's interesting.
I'm not sure what I mean, because we're an American organization, our donors are all American. It is true that the international committees have sort of expanded. There's a new Japanese committee. There is a bit of a shift in who's interested, who gave more money, who didn't. As far as the United States with the crisis, our big test was after 9/11 in 2001, because it happened in September, and then we had an annual appeal in December, and we were really not expecting to receive a lot of donations for Venice that year, because people were giving at that point for other causes in the United States. And instead, we raised more money than ever that year. And it was an amazing thing. I think it showed that with the change in the world, people started to think of what they really cared about, and people still cared about Venice. We also had more restrictions. Our board is very careful with spending. I've been put on a budget. They're always after me to not propose too many projects, because then people will want to sponsor them, and we have to watch. We've been trying to keep more money in reserves, because in the US it was maybe 2 years ago when there was a bigger crisis, 3 years ago. Things seem to be better now, but Save Venice has to ride that out, because when you have a project like this, you were asking about money. This one, we did about €70,000 worth of the testing. The actual restoration of the ceiling, the canvases, the scaffolding, it's about €650,000. So it's a large sum, but it's not an impossible sum. But we had to be careful, because we're raising that money as we go along. We have our reserves, which can cover it, but then we need our operating costs. So we do, even as a nonprofit, have to economically have people thinking of the next phase. We're also involved in another large project I didn't mention. I feel kind of guilty. It's the Academia Museum, room 24, the Sala Albergo. There's a very large Titian painting. There's the ceiling from the 1490s, other paintings, and we adopted, surprisingly, 2 years ago, that room for €400,000, because the opportunity came up. It was the right thing to do. The Academia needed to move the painting at that time. They needed us then. And that's a large project that we normally wouldn't have taken on at the same time of our commitment to San Sebastiano. That we were successful in raising funds from 3 foundations, actually, and then we can continue putting our money away. It's important to have money to do minor projects as well. Save Venice used to do more of those. You need to have one big name so that you earn money, that you can do something not less significant, but lesser known artist, or something that's part of the arte minore, or a wellhead, or a sculpture, or something that needs attention. And so that's why we have to sort of play with our funding to raise money with something popular, so we can use the extra for something else. But the world situation, as far as Europe, it's hard to tell. We just have to wait and see.
We will wait and see.
So anyone can do. Yeah, I missed the point.
More general at the end was more, who will be the owner of Venice once, we generalize this model, and newcomers in this, in this donation process, do Japanese have the same kind of approach, for instance, vis-a-vis, this kind of experiments? Do they feel the same way? Do they have the same kind of passion?
It's hard to tell. I mean, I think the English are obviously very passionate about Venice, and the Americans. There's a French committee here that works predominantly on Napoleonic projects. Anything Napoleon did, it's true. They're now restoring a wonderful project, Museo Cuore, Erbe Palazzo Reale. And that makes sense. That's what they're interested in. There's a Swiss committee that restore anything that was a Swiss architect, a Swiss artisan. It's very interesting what they do. Sardi, everything Sardi. And so there are other committees. The Japanese their first project is in the Museo Orientale, restoring a screen. And so there are some international interests that are more specific. I mean, you have the sort of more general, the sort of Anglo-Saxon approach is a little different. When I use the word ownership, I'm kind of sort of joking, because we feel like, I use the word our or mine for the painting, because you feel attached to it. It's more like your child, though. You don't own your child, but you're attached to it. And it's very clear who the owners are. I mean, we work closely with the Catholic Diocese, the state. But it is a problem. There's been some thought that Venice needs to have more controls of the European community, or what, how, because it's a situation unusual and unique to Italy. And the funding from the state has certainly dramatically been cut back. The superintendencies of monuments and fine arts no longer have their own funding to give for certain projects. And they're cut back in staff now, and that's a problem. So they may not have enough staff to be able to oversee our projects. So we won't be able to work because they don't have the staff to contribute to our projects. So.
Other comments, or please?
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, which was both enjoyable and instructive. But I would like to address your angel up there and ask her, what work of art he is going to protect next.
I guess it's the frescoes in San Sebastiano, or the big project for Save Venice. We will continue in San Sebastiano, because the more time we spend there, the more problems we see. Eventually it would be the facade, and also the side facade in the campo, because you need to protect the exterior in order to protect the frescoes because of the wall. The floor I didn't mention, but there's a yellow flooring. If you notice in some photos, there was a part of the floor caved in about 4 years ago. And so the yellow flooring was put in by the Catholic Diocese so that the church could remain open, and it helps our scaffolding because we have a level ground. We'd like to restore the floor. We're continuing in the academia. We have the entire room. We're about to start testing on that series of paintings by Carpaccio, the Santa Ursula series, that suffered a very difficult, questionable restoration about 20 years ago. And so the academia officials would like to investigate, to do more testing to see if things can be corrected. I never quite know. It depends on what phone call I get, or what priest calls me, or what museum. It's kind of fun. I go into preparing for a meeting. I put together projects which I give to our projects committee, who then evaluate, and then we decide how to present to the board. So San Sebastiano will continue to be a great love of ours, and we'll continue with other projects as the need comes up and as the funding becomes available, because we don't know either. It's all not quite, you know what you're spending, but you're never quite sure what you're getting in.
Other comments? I think it is important to figure out that you are always with your scientific committee. You are evaluating projects and opportunities, always with the scientific backup, which has obviously a control over resources as well. For every single intervention, you have to create a budget and.
Right. We do obviously rely heavily on the officials from the Superintendence of Monuments and Fine Arts to put together the project plans. We don't interfere. It's not our place to question. We can question an expense. We don't tend to question a procedure. Often we're all involved because we're all on site, or I'm on site, and we'll discuss what might be done. But the decisions are made as to how to restore, particularly by the Italian Ministry of Culture officials. Where our Comitato Scientifico, then yes, we try to make a plan of how we want to restore. We are in favor of a lot of testing before. Save Venice is willing to pay for a lot of these behind the scenes things that other committees may not have the resources. We'll pay for testing. We'll pay just to move a painting because somebody needs to move it. It's not always the evident, the flashy project. And I think that gains our respect with the Ministry of Culture, the superintendencies that work with us willingly, because they know they have someone that'll listen, that doesn't want to just restore a painting so they can take it away for an exhibition at a bank somewhere, but they're willing to restore the altar behind it and the floor around it and everything, the roof need be. So we hope at least that is the approach, because we're certainly guests here. I mean, yes, we're financing things, but very aware of our position that we weren't asked to do this, we asked to do it. And I always remind, so.
A final question. I don't want to continue too long, but you seem very discreet. You know, the committee seems to be very discreet in its functioning. Do you have, as Save Venice, or do you have, as as this group of international committee, a position, an official position about the major problems that Venice is dealing with? For instance, the increasing weight of tourism, or the Mose, the moving dams and so on. Do you have official positions on this, or do you keep kind of a low profile?
Save Venice keeps a low profile because we do consider ourselves guests, and it's not our position to question something that the Italian government has decided as far as Mose. Tourism is difficult. Our donors are also tourists. There are other committees that are more vocal in this, that have taken on a stance, and that's very admirable. Save Venice has decided not to get involved. It's not that we're not interested, we just don't think it's our place. We have our mission to restore art and architecture and to be very positive, to try to highlight the positive aspects of Venice. Undoubtedly there are problems. Tourism as well. Tourism, we suffer from tourism because our donors don't want to come because, there are too many people, I don't like to come to Venice anymore. That's true, it happens, but then there's really no simple solution. I mean, certainly the cruise ships are something to question, but who can do that? The city itself has to do it.
Yeah, perhaps from my historical point of view, it's interesting to see that I'm inspired by what Stefano was saying, but by Stefano's question, is that the committees have contributed somehow to globalize Venice and to turn Venice into more an international issue, and whatever happens in Venice is very much followed in the newspapers everywhere. And this has involved like a broadening of Venetian polity. So public opinion is much broader than just Venice. Whatever happens in Venice is not, you don't have to respond only to a local public opinion, and this is interesting. I'm rather curious to hear what the UNESCO role has been in the past, and in the present also, because from what I know, its role has been also to form a kind of coordination between the various committees. And another question I wanted to ask, just to conclude, is whether the number of committees has been decreasing since the 70s, or whether you think they're still very much alive.
Energy.
The UNESCO question. Okay, so UNESCO was very instrumental in the beginning when all this call from UNESCO to form international committees. UNESCO also at that point formed, I can't think of the word, it's for the safeguarding of Venice. Basically there was a commission basically to evaluate the situation. I'm sure you probably know the situation better than I do. The individual committees start to form independently. They meet with UNESCO, UNESCO helps them out, and it was sort of coordinating, but very loosely. I have all the Save Venice archives, so I know that the letters are coming, the bills are coming directly to Save Venice. By 1978, UNESCO is able to get a tax-exempt status. And so that, of course, makes it very interesting, so that UNESCO, the private committees sort of formalize their agreement with UNESCO. We become the UNESCO program private committees for the safeguarding of Venice, because we can have the value-added tax exemption, which is very helpful. Then all the bills start going through UNESCO. And for many years it worked just fine. There was the UNESCO permanent office here, there's Maria Teresa Ruban, who's a very strong figure. And then these things start to change UNESCO lost some of their funding after the Expo 2000 debate, which happened in the 90s. I don't know if anybody, Venice was supposed to be the site of an international expo in 2000. And in 1990, pretty much, is when the world and Venice became aware of this, and Venice didn't want that. The private committees in UNESCO became very active internationally to stop that. They wanted to build artificial islands. It was going to be this huge thing. That ended up, in some way, causing problems for UNESCO, and the funding is cut off from the Italian government. It's not clear. The committees sort of reform again, and a whole new set of rules to come in. But before, we were based with the Venice office of UNESCO, with whom we had a very good relationship. Things start to shift. Everything is going through Paris. In 1993, we had to have an association of private committees actually formed separately, an association, still working with UNESCO. UNESCO, as time goes by, becomes more and more bureaucratic. We don't pay the IVA, but in return, instead of paying the Italian government the tax, we have to pay UNESCO a tax. So we end up paying 5%. 5% to UNESCO for overhead, 3% to the private committees. It's 8%. The Venice office of UNESCO here certainly is the base for all of Eastern Europe. They have a whole different mission. The private committees are a small factor of it. Many committees were getting upset, Save Venice included, because it becomes a UNESCO restoration and not a Save Venice, where your name isn't on the sign. For years, I'm the girl from UNESCO. I was forever. I'm not the girl from UNESCO. I'm the woman from Save Venice. And so it's a kind of a mixed message that we needed UNESCO, but we didn't need to lose the identity of the private committees. And these regulations that they have, were contracts signed in Paris, money was deposited in advance. If you do a project now with UNESCO, all the money for the entire project has to be given to UNESCO. The payment might go out 3 years later, but you have to deposit the money. They have their regulations for all their international projects, so they require international bids. Well, the local superintendencies don't want an international bid. When you're dealing with the Palo Veronese, you know which restorers you want. You don't need an American to come in and do it. Right, so there are a lot of little problems with the UNESCO bureaucracy. It's a problem with the private committees, and we have great respect for UNESCO, but in this project we were successful doing independently. There are other projects that I have with Save Venice through UNESCO, it just depends. But they have, their role is not so clear. UNESCO, they have a lot of staff.
It's very clear, don't worry.
It's questionable, so from my opinion.
You probably know that recently the same problem with the same people. There's similar problems arise, for reasons that probably are not that different from those that you mentioned in the 90s. Well, if we don't have any other comment or observation, I would like to thank Gianighian, obviously, for his contribution, but especially Melissa Conn for her very rich presentation, very interesting, PowerPoint slides, but also very, very brilliant comments. Thank you very much for participating. I remind you that in a week we will have another lecture, another debate, and I really hope you will be with us for the closing ceremony of this semester. Thank you for being here.